Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. I've had quite a few new watchers, listeners, subscribers over the last week or so. So thank you to everybody who's joining us, and make sure if you like this stuff to share it with a friend, share it online, whatever you can to spread the word, and we'll keep this going. Day 13 of the Mass Casualty Commission is over. I watched the proceedings today. Actually, I took a break in the afternoon and watched a little bit of it later on just on the video feed, the lawyers' submissions, which came at the end of the day. There was a few other things, though. First, there was foundational documents, two foundational document presentations, and then there was a witness, Dr. Matthew Bowes, the Chief Medical Examiner for the province of Nova Scotia. The two foundational documents dealt with Highway 224, the death of Gina Goulet, and then the other foundational document dealt with the Big Stop, the Big Stop at the Big Stop, the death of Gabriel Wortman, the mass killer, by Constables Craig Hubley and Ben MacLeod. So I'm going to get to those. First, just a couple of things that came up in the intervening time between Monday's video and today's proceedings. There was a story in the Chronicle Herald on Saltwire about the radio hearing ability that the killer may have had. Now, I've speculated about this or thought about this a few times, in particular about the Onslow-Belmont fire hall situation. But overall, it seemed like the killer did have some ability to stay ahead or avoid, elude capture. And so there was some speculation, including I certainly shared the speculation that maybe he had some ability to listen in on the radio chatter. And there was a story in the Herald that talked about how he had purchased this Motorola police radio years ago, and it was burned in the fire, but it certainly could have been functional, and that there were significant chunks of time overnight where many of what would normally have been encrypted conversations had to be broadcast over unencrypted channels, and so certainly the killer may have heard quite a bit of that. Now, I had thought of this in a slightly different way when it came to the Onslow-Belmont situation, because the killer, you recall, had gone past the fire hall about 10 minutes before Constables Brown and Melanson showed up and started shooting. And so I speculated, well, had the killer access to radio? Maybe he would have broadcast something to say, look, there's a sighting at the fire hall, and that's what led. Because when you look at the distances, and particularly where I've been there and I've seen the vantage points, the way they come down the road and stop well before the fire hall, there's just no way you would do that and be confident that you have seen the right person and start shooting. It seems likely that they had some information. Now, there's nothing to suggest that we've seen so far that the killer, in fact, was broadcasting anything over the radio, if he did have radio capabilities. But I went back through the CERT report to answer this question. Had Brown and Melanson any private communications from anybody over their private phones? We know many officers were using their phones for different purposes that night, to avoid tying up the radio or to get map data or whatever. And so I wonder whether Constables Brown and Melanson may have received somebody send them a message, hey, he's in front of the fire hall, or something along those lines. Any kind of information that led them to this, what just seems like a rash decision to shoot from a distance. And of course, there's dispute over whether they showed it a warning and all those sorts of things. So I looked through the CERT report, and their personal phones and the information, call logs, all that stuff, none of that was used or was part of the CERT investigation, and it doesn't appear that the Mass Casualty Commission has sought those records either. So be curious to see, to wonder if they're called as witnesses, presuming that they will be called as witnesses, whether that information will come out. Certainly should. It would fit the description of events as laid out by the witnesses, and would certainly explain something, explain their actions. Perhaps they're trying to protect somebody, whoever gave them the what turned out to be, I guess, false information, if that was the case. So just something that I caught through the Saltwire Chronicle Herald article, which was really interesting. So we'll see that report that they referenced in there about the radio communications. I couldn't find a copy of that report, but that'll be posted at some point. Now, so for today's proceedings, otherwise, some very important details. From first of all, the death of Gina Goulet. And we know Miss Goulet was a denturist, same as Gabriel Wortman was, and that at one point he had asked her to come work for him in Dartmouth. She said no. There's some news reports that there was a dispute or some comment that she made at a conference a year or two beforehand that may have embarrassed him. He knew where her cottage was. They had passed it. Him and Miss Banfield had passed it the day before when they went driving. So certainly they were known to each other. But remember now, the killer was just leaving the scene of the Heidi Stevenson and Joey Weber killings and going south on the 224. There's a witness that says he drove past Miss Goulet's house and then turned back around. So, of course, the killer would be aware at this point that he's been identified, and many people will have seen the vehicle he was driving. And so it seems that just because he did this U-turn and drove back to Miss Goulet's place and into her yard, hid behind her house, went in, and after he killed her, he looks like he got changed and took her vehicle. Perhaps not so much a targeted killing as just him wanting to extend his killing spree by disguising himself, getting a different vehicle. If I was just interpreting his actions, that's what it seems to indicate. He left his RCMP clothing behind, although of course he took his guns with him. Now, we go from there, and the killer goes... The next part of the day was the foundational document presentation of the Big Stop. My biggest question coming into this was whether the Mass Casualty Commission was going to follow the lead of CERT, who ignored a very key piece of information. It seemed this earlier incident at the Petro-Canada in Elmsdale, which is not far away, where the killer had driven originally, because Miss Goulet's car was on empty, he drove originally to the Petro-Can in Elmsdale to try to fill up. The pumps were turned off, but at the same time he's arriving, the ERT van or SUV is arriving from the other direction, and they pull up basically to the same pump. The killer pulls up to the wrong side and then tries to fix that, but the pumps are turned off because of everything that was going on, and so both parties have to leave. It doesn't appear that the ERT squad recognized him, although they were looking at Wortman while they were there, just a few feet away. But nevertheless, they then go to the Big Stop, where Wortman pulls up to the gas station again and sits in his vehicle for a few seconds, it sounds like, 15, 20 seconds or before the other ERT vehicle pulls up. Unrelated, and as far as the Mass Casualty Commission is concerned, or what they're explaining to us, unaware of this previous incident or previous sighting or not sighting at the Elmsdale Petro-Canada. Constables Hubley, who was driving, the dog handler. Craig Hubley, I knew a little bit from Antigonish. He was posted there for a while. Very good officer, had a good reputation, and a very diligent worker there. I don't know Constable MacLeod, who was in the passenger seat with him. They are going to testify tomorrow, so we'll look forward to hearing from them and their personal experience of it. But it sounds like they, according to their statement, just they needed to get gas as well. We're unsure how long they were going to be still pursuing the killer, and so pulled up to get gas. Constable Hubley says he identified the killer and then took the actions he did, which was to pull his gun out, look over, and as soon as the killer raised a hand, apparently to take a shot or to raise his gun hand, then Constable Hubley started shooting. Constable MacLeod did as well, and the killer was finished. Although we found out in today's presentation, and this had been reported previously by Frank Magazine, that the killer in fact had shot himself as well. He had discharged one bullet, and it was self-inflicted wound. Although Dr. Bose, the chief medical examiner, indicates that in his opinion it wasn't that one shot that killed himself, but it was the shots from Constables Hubley and MacLeod. So, not really much turns on that, I suppose, although it's relevant that the killer's plan seemed to be to go as long as he could. He had 5 weapons, all kinds of ammunition still in the car. Go as long as he could until, it was over, or he couldn't escape, and then kill himself. Certainly that seems to be, well, it's what he did. So one would imagine that he may have given that some thought prior to those moments. They were 12 and 11 shots taken by the 2 officers, respectively. And there was lots of ammunition found and all of those things. So that was the end of it. Although they took him out of the car afterwards and tied his hands behind his back for some reason. It's not quite clear. We'll see what the officers say about that. That seems like an unnecessary precaution under the circumstances. So that was the foundational document of the sort of final moments at the Big Stop. There's a few things not covered in there, but that have been revealed by the media, and they were included actually in the foundational documents. One is that Constable Brown, whose name we're familiar with now, had almost a third blue-on-blue shooting where he was involved. This time it was a Halifax Regional Police officer who was stationed behind a vehicle that was at a police checkpoint, and there's radio traffic from Constable Brown that suggests that they were going to get him, and thankfully no shots were fired. That situation was cleared up quickly enough to avert some mortal danger. The second thing was there were 2, if people know the Big Stop exit, you go up, if you're going towards Halifax, you go up on the right and you pass by the weigh station for transfer trucks. There were 2 RCMP SUVs, one that went down the wrong way on the ramp, and then one that went up just before the killer arrived at the Big Stop. And apparently those SUVs have been unaccounted for with as far as GPS is concerned. Nobody's identified who the officers were that were in those vehicles, or what they were doing there, or what they saw, or anything else. So some questions emerging from that, and none of that mentioned in the foundational document presentation by Miss Mancini. So some questions still emerging about that situation, and of course that draws questions about the process. 2 other things happened. One today. One was that we heard from Dr. Bose. Dr. Bose testified first about the killer and the post-mortem there, which I've mentioned. He also talked about Heather O'Brien and the Hunter Road incident. We talked about this a number of times, and has the Fitbit situation, where her Fitbit data was still recording heart rate up to 8 hours later after she was thought to have been dead. Dr. Bose says that in fact she did die of multiple gunshot wounds, 4 shots, one through the brain, one through the aorta, either of which would have killed her, almost immediately. Certainly the shot to the brain, he says, would have ended her consciousness basically immediately. So he said, he used the words rapidly and certainly lethal. So in his view, anyway, that's a clear case where she died basically instantly. And anyway, I'm not sure if that closes the door completely. I certainly have a lot of respect for Dr. Bose. People will be familiar with him. He knows he was very much involved and critical in getting the Desmond inquiry started, and testified very ably there, was very helpful to the Desmond family, and so I have a great deal of respect for him. Knew him on previous cases as well, so a lot of respect for his work. By his own admission, I suppose, he's not an expert on Fitbits or fitness trackers, but certainly his testimony today should be perhaps comforting, if that word can be used under these circumstances, to the family, that their loved one was not laying there alive for hours after the fact. Now, the last thing today was the submissions from the lawyers for the various parties about witnesses and gaps in the foundational documents. And I won't go through all of them because there were many gaps identified, many witnesses that need to be called. And I would say that the submissions were respectful but highly critical of the process that has been unfolding through the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings. The brevity, the short presentations of these foundational documents, which are many pages. One was nearly 100 pages long. Yet we get half an hour or 1 hour presentation missing many of the key details. Well, the point being, if you're not going to have witnesses, if you're going to rely on these foundational documents, then make sure that the presentations are thorough. The other thing is the delay between the foundational document presentation and then an opportunity to speak to the gaps and any witnesses. So, if you want a complete and trustworthy factual narrative, it's good to have all of those things happening at once. And so, you can be thorough about it, and people remember what's just been said or what's been said about a certain topic. So, I'd look to hear. So the lawyers were, like I say, respectful but highly critical, looking to hear from witnesses. I'd say I would look to hear now a strong and direct response, a statement from the commissioners, perhaps even tomorrow morning when we get started, reacting to these criticisms. Like, do they understand? Say something that makes us know, that lets us know that you understand and you're alive to these criticisms, and you plan to do something about it to address them. I mean, they're fair criticisms. They are widespread by very reasonable people. So, if we don't hear from the commissioners directly responding to those criticisms, I wouldn't be surprised if you start hearing pressure coming for direct political intervention to fix what's been going astray about some of this procedural issues. So that was it for today, day 13. Some very important information, of course, the critical last moments and the death of Miss Goulet. Tomorrow we're going to hear witnesses. We're going to hear from Constable Hubley. We're going to hear from Constable MacLeod. Not sure anything else is on the schedule. Those were what was identified. So we'll look forward to that tomorrow. And I'll be back be watching it live and reacting on Twitter and doing back to talk about it after the day is done tomorrow. So until then, we will see you next time.